Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
This episode is brought to you by Organifi. You guys, one of the only things that every nutritional expert that we've had on the show seems to actually agree on is that we all need to eat more vegetables, eat more greens, eat organic, cut out all the processed junk. Well, who has the time, right? Who has the time to go out, do the shopping, make the salads, make the juices, make the smoothies? And that's what I love so much about Organifi. Their product is an all-organic green juice. It has all of the nutrients that you need. It tastes absolutely amazing, and it's made by wonderful people who I consider to be personal friends. And as listeners of this show, you guys can actually save 20% on your first order. And all you have to do is go to Organifi.com. That's Organifi.com and use the coupon code SUPERHUMAN at checkout. This episode is brought to you by Become a Super Learner, the Masterclass. You guys, if you have ever wanted to learn things faster, to read faster and waste less time reading boring textbooks, if you've ever wanted to have near perfect memory for names, numbers, anything you want to learn, and expand your mind and retain information in a way that you never thought possible, well, then the Become a Super Learner Masterclass is exactly what you've been looking for. It's a 10-week program developed by myself and my mentors alongside some of the world's best memory experts and world record-holding memory champions. It'll take you from zero to super learning hero in just a matter of 10 weeks in about 30 minutes a day or less. Now, you can go ahead and sign up for a free trial with no credit card required. All you have to do is go to jle.vi/learn. And if you choose to pick up the full course, you will also get an incredible discount for listeners of this podcast only. So please make sure to check it out and support the show. And on to today's episode. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to this week's episode, which is lovingly provided to you thanks to a review from Rebecca Dobbs of the US of A, who says, "Great podcast, super inspiring, 5 stars. I got hooked on this podcast when they had Danielle Laporte on and have listened to every episode since. Broad topics, practical tips. I learn and apply something from every episode." I have to admit, I don't think we've had Danielle Laporte on the show. I'll have to double check, but I'm pretty sure we haven't. So that might have been another show. But nonetheless, I'm still honored and pleased that you're enjoying the show, Rebecca. And we'll be happy to bring you guys more episodes if you guys just leave some reviews, because we are running out of reviews. In fact, that was the last one I have. Fortunately, I've recorded a couple episodes already. But if you guys want more episodes, leave more reviews. On to today's episode. Thank you, Rebecca. Today, we are honored to have with us Dean Karnazes. He's a speaker, a best-selling author, an athlete, and an entrepreneur. And Time Magazine named him one of the top 100 most influential people in the world. Why, you ask? Because he is an ultra-marathoner. Not just any ultra-marathoner, by the way. He has run 350 continuous miles for going to sleep for 3 nights. He's run the Sahara Desert at 120 degrees. He has run 50 marathons in 50 days. He's biked for 24 hours straight. He's swum San Francisco Bay. I could just go on basically and spend the entire episode talking about all the insane feats of endurance and athleticism that Dean has done. But I won't, because I want you guys to hear from him. In any case, he's been on the Today Show, 60 Minutes, Late Night Show, CBS, ESPN, CNN, basically all the networks. All the networks. I have a list here. Again, I could spend the entire episode. I wanted to get Dean on the show for very obvious reasons. He is literally a superhuman. He has a lot of very interesting things to say about tenacity, about fitness, about training. He has some things to say that will surprise you, some things to say that definitely will not surprise you. And in general, we just hit it off and had a really great conversation. So I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Without any further ado, my new super friend, Mr. Dean Karnazes. Mr. Dean Karnazes, welcome to the show. I have to admit, I saw you years and years ago on Stan Lee's Superhuman, and I've been dying to ask you some questions, so I'm really excited about it.
It was all made up, but yeah, let's get into it.
So, Dean, for those who maybe don't know about you, I tried to describe it a little bit in the intro, but you've got a lot to cover. I want to hear how you would describe yourself and what you do.
What I do is I'm described as an ultra marathoner. And what does an ultra marathoner do? Well, an ultra marathoner runs beyond marathon. So ultra, the prefix ultra in Latin means beyond. And an ultra marathon is anything beyond a marathon. A marathon is, roughly 26 miles or 42 kilometers. So anything that goes past that is considered an ultra marathon. And these are foot races, sometimes lasting 2 or 3 days without sleep and just running.
And to this day, what's the longest race that you've run?
Well, in one continuous push without sleep, I've run 350 miles. But I've also done other things, like I've run from Los Angeles to New York City, which was, in 75 days, running about 40 to 50 miles a day. So that was over 3,000 miles. But that was, over 75 days, not one single. So I slept at night once in a while.
Wow. So I feel like we could use the entire interview on just 2 questions. Why and how? And I think the first question is probably a shorter one. So I'm going to ask, why? How did you get into this? What motivates someone to do such extreme feats?
Yeah, well, why is not an easy question to answer. And I've written 4 books now trying to answer, why does anyone run? And why do we seek pain and seek adversity and seek these sort of challenges when we don't have to? I don't know. There's something profoundly powerful about running. I mean, it's such a simple act, right? You're just putting one foot in front of the other, but there's great power in it somehow. And I think the mastery of my mind and body, kind of the self-discipline to will myself through situations where I want to quit. I think that challenge is something that really compels me. And just seeing how far I can push the limits of human endurance is kind of a curiosity as well. So that perhaps addresses the why. The how do you do it? You run a lot and you train a lot and you dedicate, you've got to dedicate yourself wholeheartedly to what you're doing and commit and sacrifice. I'll never forget the first time I heard about someone running 100 miles or, 160 kilometers. I said, wow, that's crazy. A human can't do that. So, how many days does it take? Where the hotels or, the campsites along the way? And this gentleman just looked at me kind of, curiously and said, no, the starting gun goes off and you run and you try to reach the 100-mile mark within 24 hours. And I couldn't get my head around it. I said, what do you mean 24 hours? Like, where do you sleep? And when I said that, he kind of looked at me. He's like, sleep? I mean, you just put on a headlamp and you just keep running. And I said, straight through the night? And he said, yes. So I thought, I've got to try this. It seems impossible, and maybe I can do the impossible.
Wow. This blows my mind so much. And I have to say, I've asked many different athletes in the history of the show. I've asked them this question, and I've never been able to get a really clear answer on it. And I feel like you're going to have a clear answer, which is, what's going on in your head that allows you to push through? Because I imagine this is not a pleasant experience for you, and you're going through an amount of pain, hunger, exhaustion that most people will likely never feel in their lives. And I want to understand what gives you the capability to push through, in between your ears.
I think that it's to turn off what's in between my ears. I think if you can turn off the noise, you can get through anything. And how do you do that? To me, I get very granular. I just focus on the here and now. So I blank out everything in my mind. It's almost like a meditative state. So I don't think about the future. I don't think about how far I've got to go to the finish line. I don't reflect on the past. I try to quiet my mind, which is not easy, as you know. Mm-hmm. And I do that by just focusing on my next footstep and my next footstep and my next footstep. I might have 10, 20 hours to go, another 100 miles to go, but I don't think about that. I really put myself in the here and now, in the moment, just being the best that I can in that very footstep. And it's crazy, but if you can get yourself there, I mean, I can do this for 8 hours and get through things that people say, wow, that was just amazing. You didn't eat, you didn't stop. How were you able to do that? And I think that's really what happens.
That's absolutely incredible. And I think it's interesting, the parallels between meditation and just taking yourself outside of the future when you're going to be resting, or the past when you weren't running, and just absolutely incredible. I do want to ask, you must have, in addition to a very strict training regimen, you must have a very specific diet that you follow that allows you to do these extreme feats.
Well, I'll preface that by saying, my diet has changed a lot over the years. I'll never live down the story of one time I was running a 200-mile race, and I was out in the middle of nowhere by myself in this backcountry road, but I had a credit card and a cell phone in my pack. So I ordered a pizza and had them delivered to me on the roadside. And so I used to eat a lot of junk food. I just thought, some of these adventures, you're burning 20, 30 calories, over the course of 2 days, 20 to 30,000 calories. Mm-hmm. Just eat whatever you can to replace those. And that's changed a lot. I've now really cleaned up my diet, if you will. So I've gone to a paleo. I mean, you're familiar with the paleo diet. So somewhat of a paleo diet, only also very raw. So, if you can't pick it from a tree, dig it from the earth, catch it with your hands or catch it with a hook, I really don't eat it. I had a mentor, this guy named Jack LaLanne, who was one of the original, fitness, the weight guys from Venice Beach. And he told me, he said, Dean, if man makes it, don't eat it. And if it tastes good, spit it out. I'm like, okay, that's good advice. I like this guy.
Wow. I'm dying to know, how do you get that quantity of calories on a paleo diet? Are you just dousing everything in olive oil and ghee, or how's that working?
No, you're absolutely right. It's shifting the calories to more fat calories. So things like nut butter, avocado, olive oil, certainly coconut oil. And these are, as you probably know, fats have 9 calories per gram, where carbohydrates and protein just have 4 calories. So that is over twice as much of, fuel in the same amount of space, if you will. And what I've done is I've shifted my diet to using more fats as fuels. So it's called the fat adapted diet. It's, the state of ketosis, if you will. And I've trained my body to use fats as fuel very efficiently versus carbohydrate, because you only have a certain amount of carbohydrate stored in your muscle glycogen, and you can only replace it, through consumption at a rate that won't keep up with the deficit you're creating.
Absolutely. Now, when I mentioned the Stanley Superhuman, I don't know if you were joking or serious, but you mentioned, it was all made up. And I remember that they did all kinds of tests on you and tested your blood and found that you had certain biomarkers that were just absolutely exceptional. And I think probably people in the audience are saying to themselves, well, this guy is superhuman. And, like Michael Phelps has longer arms, this guy has some genetic advantage. Would you say that that's true? Or would you encourage anyone that, you can develop this superhuman capacity?
I think very much the latter. I think anyone can do what I'm doing. I really believe that. And, other endurance athletes have similar, not quite as pronounced, but similar physiological responses or adaptations to training that I have. So I really believe if someone really wants to do what I do, they can do it, but they've got to want it. And that means they've got to be passionate about it, which means they've got to train as hard as I train. They've really got to dedicate themselves wholeheartedly. There's no shortcuts to doing this stuff. And, if you don't love it, if you're not passionate about it, you'll burn out. You won't be able to keep it up. So, I always say that listen to everyone, follow no one. I really believe anyone can do what I'm doing, but you just, you got to pay the dues.
I love that. I really love that, especially, as a teacher and teaching something that doesn't come easily, although probably a lot easier to learn memory and speed reading techniques than it is to run 100 miles. But I love that message of, you really have to do the work. And if you're not willing to do the work, it's probably because you don't want the end goal nearly enough.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's little things you can do, but there's no tricks to running 100 mile. There's no techniques. You talked about techniques you can learn to improve things. It just comes down to grunt work and how badly do you want it? It's not very cerebral in that regard.
Right. I also remember, the memory guy in me remembers that watching you run, you're conserving energy in a very smart way. But besides that, it's, as you said, putting one foot in front of the other, but you're not lifting your feet up as much as you would expect a runner to, and you're not kind of like taking these big gallant leaps. Is that correct?
Yeah, but these are not things that I consciously said, okay, let's change this, let's shift this. I mean, your body finds what's most efficient. And thankfully, I have good biomechanics. My alignment, my running structure is very good. So I let my body just naturally find that kind of rhythm and that gait that is most efficient. And I think most people, if they're not overcoached, they'll do the same for themselves. You know, we used to build footwear that kind of corrected these anomalies in people's gaits. You know, we said, oh, wow, you're a supinator or you're a pronator. Let's build this fancy shoe with all this medial posting in there to control this thing. And it created a lot of injuries. And now the thinking is, people have these awkwardnesses in their gait because their alignment's not perfect. And this is their body's ways of compensating for that to prevent injury. So I think that's the latest kind of thinking on that matter.
That's really interesting. I've experienced that in my own life where I have one muscle in my back that just always spasms. And it's because in certain movements, I figured out after years of wondering why it was this one muscle. And I figured out it was because my shoulder was dislocated during birth. And so one side is trying to protect the other side from being dislocated again. And I could feel the looseness in the joint. Just fascinating how the body compensates without you even knowing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit more extreme than what I've gone through. But yeah, to your point, yeah, very much so.
Well, let me ask this. I think a lot of us probably wonder, you hear these days about even young kids having injuries from running, and it's because, we're sitting all day and we're not healthy and we're not using our muscles the way that we should. Have you had any injuries or wear down to joints or anything like that?
Knock on wood or, knock on the side of my head, I've never had a running related injury, an overuse injury or otherwise.
Wow.
But I will back up a bit and kind of go over the preface that you used in that question, saying we're all sitting so much these days. I don't know about you, but I'm not sitting.
Yeah, I mean,
ever. So we're both standing up. And I mean, I've had a standing desk for probably the past 15 years. So I never sit down. I mean, sitting is a poison. I think it's toxic. I also do sets of pull-ups and push-ups and sit-ups and dips and burpees throughout the course of the day. Oh, wow. So I've got this routine of HIIT training that, I did a quick routine before we started the interview, and right afterward I'll do the same. It's about 10 to 12 minutes, high intensity, and it's a full body workout. And I do these throughout the course of the day. So I'm kind of trying to recreate how we lived, when we were perfect animals. And I think that helps a lot with injury prevention and, back problems and all that sort of stuff.
I really like that. And I don't know why I never had that idea or why I've never heard anyone say that of just like the bad habit of snacking, how we all kind of snack throughout the day. Why don't you snack on exercise and, drop down and do a few burpees in the middle of the day instead of having that third cup of coffee with all the sugar in it?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I've learned a lot of kind of, hacks, if you will. And that's one of them. The other is, snacking the course of the day is not a good idea. And, I've talked to so many people that say, I travel so much and I put on 5 pounds. You just can't eat healthy when you're on the road. And one thing I've learned is that it's better not to eat than to eat something bad.
Absolutely.
So I also do intermittent fasting. And if I'm traveling, I know that, if you stick that in your mouth, you're going to feel worse than if you just fast for this next flight.
Wow, it's so funny that you say that because it's coming out before this episode, so I'll tell people about it, but I just recorded an episode where I was fasting for 3 days and I record on the third day. And that was one of my big takeaways is now that I know that I can fast for this extended period, if I find myself on a 22-hour flight between Tel Aviv and California, and the only thing at the stop in Frankfurt is pretzels, and I can't find a decent meal, I now know that I will feel better being on that 30-hour fast or whatever it might be than I would feel if I ate the pretzel. And that was my exact takeaway is that now I have this toolkit that I'm confident and comfortable getting to that situation.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners are thinking, oh, I can't fast. Like, there's just no way I could do that. And you probably we got very granular on the experience, but it gets easier, people.
Oh, yeah.
And especially the first time you try it, I mean, the first 12 or 14 hours, you want to chew off the back of your hand. You're so hungry. Mm-hmm. But if you can get beyond that, as you probably experienced, it almost becomes like you don't want to eat.
Yeah. You're essentially high on ketones.
Well, you've got the runner's high kind of thing too. It's endorphins in a large sort of way.
Absolutely. So have you found then that you actually greatly prefer running in ketosis as opposed to, you see the traditional marathon runner shooting these gel packs, which are just sugar and electrolytes, and you've actually found a better experience running on ketosis?
Personally, yes. And I'll preface that again by listen to everyone, follow no one. I run with a group of guys that are incredible athletes. And, some of them, I know guys that eat 60, 70, 80 gel packs during a 100-mile run. That's all they eat. They don't eat any solid food. Yeah, I could never do that. I mean, that's just pure sugar. But for me, because of the pace, if you're sprinting, it's better to have carbs. But a marathon is not a sprint. And that's the thing. For these longer durations, you're primarily burning fat for fuel.
I want to ask you, Dean, are there any other kind of skills? That was such a good one with the kind of snacking on exercise. Are there any other kind of skills or habits or routines that you do throughout the day when you're not running that you feel just make you in general as an author, as a business person, as an athlete, perform at a higher level?
One thing that I've really learned is to protect my time and protect my attention. It's so easy to get distracted these days and go off kind of in these spirals of, news feeds or whatever it is. So I've I've been there. I think a lot of us have been through that and either are still there right now, kind of swept up in it, in this bubble, or I've kind of moved beyond it. So I protect my attention like crazy. I'm very, very sparse in scheduling, especially, sort of interviews like this. I mean, I probably take 1 in 20 requests. So you're special. How's that? You're one of the good ones.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much. I actually also really like that you said, can we please keep this to a 30-minute interview? I think it'll be better and it'll save time. I appreciate that direct, open honesty. And I've found that that's one of the best ways to protect your time is just asking other people.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And the other thing I do, I mean, if it is multitasking, which it can be debatable, I love to read. I mean, I encourage people to read, absorb books. I primarily listen to nonfiction, sometimes adventure books, sometimes business books, but audiobooks. So when you're training 6 or 7 hours a day running, you can't have a book in front of you. So I've got over 500 audiobooks on my playlist. And that's one great thing that has kept me current is just being able to, listen while I run.
Any particular books that stand out as having changed your life?
What has changed my life? There's an author, Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now.
Love it. Mm-hmm.
So you probably know all about this book. That was pretty profound when I read that. A book called The Endurance, which is about Shackleton, the first guy that tried to reach the South Pole. And it's an incredible adventure story as well as an incredible business story in how he led this expedition back when expeditions used to be very hierarchical. And he really ran a very flat expedition. And I don't want to be a spoiler and say what happened in the end, but it's an incredible read if listeners are interested. It's called The Endurance. That was the name of his boat that he used to try to get to the South Pole.
Now, I want to ask, have you read A New Earth, which is his second book, Eckhart Tolle's second book?
You know what? I found that the second book better, actually.
Me too.
I think a lot of people like the introduction of the first book, but I really liked A New Earth Awakening. I thought that was a better book, personally.
I agree. If someone asked me which book changed my life the most, it was either 4 Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss or A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I know Tim pretty well. And, when I read the book, I thought, wow, I'm already, this is stuff I already know because I was friends with him and we talked a lot and, we kind of were working in parallel on kind of the same things he's discussing in the 4 Hour Workweek. So it didn't really impact me. It didn't have that much impact on me at all. I just thought, wow, so he's just explaining what our day looks like. But to a lot of people, it was kind of novel and breakthrough. Really cool. I actually didn't know that you know Tim. That's pretty neat. Yeah. Well, he's a Bay Area guy. I live in San Francisco, so he's a Bay Area guy as well. I'm actually originally from the Valley as well. I forgot to mention to you. Pretty funny, small world. So, Dean, I want to ask you on the topic of books, I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your books. And, I know you have a new book coming out right now, but also the other books. How should people choose which book? What are the topics that are being covered in each of them? I think for your listeners, my very first book, which is called Ultra Marathon Man, Confessions of an All-Night Runner. I think that would be a book that would really introduce people to this world of ultramarathoning. So it would be something material completely different than what they've ever read before. And that book is kind of like the 4-hour work week for endurance junkies, if you will. So, I mean, I've got, as Tim, I'm sure, has, tens of thousands of messages from people thanking him. I have the very same amount of messages from people saying, a lot of times the first line, the first sentence of the message is, wow, this book changed my life.
It's awesome.
Which to me is just like, I'm like, I can barely, write my name in the dirt with a stick. How did my book change your life? But a lot of people just said, so I would just really say, check out Ultramarathon Man. If you like it, then there's a few others that are somewhat similar, but in kind of different twists on that.
That's fantastic. And then tell me a little bit about the new book.
Yeah, the new book is an exploration of the original marathon. So it's called The Road to Sparta. And the Battle of Marathon took place in 490 BCE. And this was when the Persians actually invaded Greece. And the Greeks knew they were badly outnumbered and they were going to get slaughtered. So they sent this foot messenger, this long distance runner named Phidippides, to run to recruit the Spartans into battle to help, push off the Persians. And that was the genesis of the marathon. A lot of people who run marathons know kind of a little bit of the lore, but the story goes that this runner, as his final mission was to run from the battlefield of Marathon when the Greeks actually defeated the Persians somehow. So he ran from that battlefield to the Acropolis, and he proclaimed Nike, Nike, or Nike, Nike, which means victory, victory in Greek. We are victorious. And then he dropped and died. Mm-hmm. So, it's a very glorious ending to some. To the ancient Greeks, to die and serving, your fellow man is kind of like the highest calling. And I retell the story and I recreate the story. So I go to Greece and I research the path he took. I worked with a professor from Cambridge University, Professor Dr. Park Hartledge, who's like the foremost authority on ancient Greek culture. So it's kind of a history book. If you're a history geek, this is a book to read. And it also, what I learned in writing this is that this run largely preserved democracy, because up until the Greeks, there was no such thing as democracy. There was no self-rule by the people. There was kind of this hierarchical dictatorship, as most societies had evolved, whereas, there was a king or there was a ruler and there was his subjects under him. But Greece was very, very different than that. And, had the Persians invaded Greece, that whole idea of democracy, which was just, coming to the forefront, would have been squelched altogether. They're just completely demolished. And who knows how things would have evolved from there. But it would have been very much different, human evolution, cultural evolution from that point forward, had the Greeks lost at the Battle of Marathon.
Very, very cool. And interesting that you're taking kind of this whole different approach from the fitness books that you've written and dealing in the whole athletic industry. I think that's really, really cool. And I always like to see authors branching out because it gives me hope that I'm not going to get stuck writing memory books for the rest of my life. I love writing about memory, but I'm like, I have other interests. I want to write a course about Bitcoin and, so I'm always really happy to see, guys like Tim who are like, okay, cool. Like we talked about work. Now I want to tell you guys all about cooking.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's really influenced me in that regard. And that's part, he's part of the inspiration that I thought, I've got to step out of this genre of just writing, adventure running books. It's got to be something different. So, yeah.
Exactly. So, Dean, I know we have run up on time here. I want to give you an opportunity to let people know where they can learn more. Where would you have us send them?
If you're old like me, you can go to my website, which is ultramarathonman.com. But just plug in my name to any search engine and, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, those are my three biggest social media platforms, or check out my website.
You got it. And we will link to all your books as well. If people want to support us, use our links in the podcast. Dean, I want to thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure. And I knew we would have a lot in common and similar mindset. So it's been a real pleasure. I do want to ask you the one last question though, which is if people take away one big message from this episode and they carry it with them for the rest of their lives, what would you hope for that to be?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll revert back to the ancient Greeks and a quote that's in my last book, and it's O Ptolemon Nike, which means a literal translation is "Who dares wins."
Brilliant.
So I think it speaks to the just dare. And even if you lose, you win.
Brilliant. Dean, I want to thank you again for sharing your time and your wisdom and inspiration with our audience. I certainly enjoyed it. I know they did as well.
Well, next time you're in San Francisco, let's go running.
Absolutely. I will try to keep up and I will be there.
Okay, you're on the record.
April.
You heard that, people. He's on the record.
I'll try, Matt. I'll try. All right, Super Friends, that is all we have for you today. But I hope you guys really enjoyed the show, and I hope you learned a ton of actionable information, tips, advice that will help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or drop us a quick little note on the Twitter machine at GoSuperhuman. Also, if you have any ideas for anyone out there who you would love to see on the show, we always love to hear your recommendations. You can submit on our website, or you can just drop us an email and let us know. That's all for today, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.